Yes, it's still the morning. Thank you all very much for coming. And we've got a great panel, and I hope you can hear back here, yeah? Yeah, don't be shy, you can come over here if you want to. And the whole idea is that there will be limited presentations, if any, just a few words by the panelists if they want to. But the whole idea is to throw this out to the audience, you know, where we're going to go, and with the burning issue, the future of Europe's East. Of course, it begs the question. Konstantin, hello. Yes. And there's our last panelist. It begs the question where the East is going to go, how far it is. Just before I throw out the first question, I want to introduce this stellar panel. And there are two ladies on this panel, and we've got French as well. And this is a very multi-ethnic, multi-gender panel. She's Russian. Yes, that's okay. But she's French, okay? Anyway, exactly. So I'll start from over there. Konstantin from Eggert, a very old colleague based in Moscow, a very former BBC Russia service in Moscow. Great to have you here. It's even greater, I have to be careful how I use the superlatives, to have the Deputy Defense Minister of Georgia, that's Mikheil Darchiashvili. Great to have you here. We're looking forward to opening up this discussion. And then we have a distinguished Polish guest here.
Jacek.
Yeah, and I'm going to get it right. Jacek Protasiewicz. He was Vice President of the European Parliament, and he's from the region of Wroclaw, or as he told me, Lower Silesia. And then we have Mendras, Professor of Political Science, Sciences Po, Paris. We're very lucky to have her because she's just returned from Odessa, where she's been monitoring the elections. Great to have you here, Russian expert. And we have Pavol, an old friend. We're sounding all very old. An old friend, a German Marshall Fund, European Endowment Democracy, based in Bratislava, knows the area very well. And before I ask the question, a big welcome to our guests from Belarus. Hello, big welcome to our friends from Belarus. Nice to have you here. And so we're going to kick off. This Wroclaw forum has been clearly and rightly so dominated by Ukraine. I wouldn't like to make this totally dominated by Ukraine because there's issues, there's regions other than Ukraine that we have to discuss. So my first important question is literally the future of Europe's East. I mean, what actually kind of future does it have, given the instability in Ukraine and the whole uncertainty over Transnistria and indeed in Belarus? Pavol, I'll start off with you. The East, where is the East?
I think that until Vilnius summit, we were quite clear what are we talking about when we mentioned Europe's East. We spoke about 6 countries of Eastern Partnership, Russia plus. And I think that everything has changed after Vilnius summit. I think nowadays defining what we mean by East would vary a lot. And I think that for me and for the sake of this discussion, I think that I would be very happy if we could bring in more Russia, and happy that we have Russian speaker on panel, which I was missing very much throughout the whole conference. We had great speakers from the United States, but quite many of them. And I think that if we want to define what East is before new government of EU comes in fall, I think we need to review very carefully whether the concept of Eastern Partnership is valid after Euro elections and after new leadership comes on board, and how are we going to put Russia into our calculations and strategy. Otherwise, Vladimir Putin will be playing with us as he is doing, and I will conclude with contradicting a little bit Zbigniew Brzezinski's and Radek Sikorski's statement that Russia did us a favor by doing these steps in Ukraine. I'm still not sure whether this is true. I think that I would be happy to see on the 6th Global Forum in Wroclaw whether we will quote these sentences as something valid or not. And it would define how we define what East is for us, not only geographically but politically and strategically.
Yeah, and probably some of the Polish representatives would say culturally as well. Marie, Pavol has brought up the idea of Russia, and there's been, barring Konstantin, I mean, we haven't had a Russian voice here. I mean, the East is, Europe's East, I mean, does it stretch towards Russia, and what is this Russia that we want to include?
Pavol is right to stress that the European architecture changed with Vilnius. Nobody in France was interested in the Vilnius summit. I was one of the very few to actually attend, and not being a diplomat or a political representative. I think it is a historical event. It will remain in history textbooks. So it is so interesting that sometimes you need a little bit of intuition, anticipation, to understand that important things can happen in what could have been a boring summit. What happened in Vilnius, but more than in Vilnius, on Maidan during those months, and I was happy to be on Maidan in December, and then later again recently, you know, something formidable happened, and Ukraine, which we all had very comfortably forgotten since Yanukovych had been so-called well elected, Ukraine became central. So it's interesting how Ukraine no longer was Vostok or East, except maybe for the Russians, but it became the center of Europe. It became central. And I think this is now what has changed, not only the politics or geography of that part of Europe, but it also brought back on the political scene society. And, you know, this we had been waiting for, you know, in those last years. It happened in Russia in the winter of 11-12, but then stopped because of Putin's repression. And it happened in Ukraine, and it led to free and fair elections. So, you know, elections have won the battle, and I think this is really what is changing the architecture in Europe.
This is very interesting. I wonder, though, you say Ukraine is central, and is clearly central here, but Jacek, I would like to ask you, do you think, however, that the Europeans, and I have to mention the word the Western Europeans or the Eastern Europeans, do they see Ukraine through the prism of Russia?
Well, I mean, I do agree that Ukraine became the central, the focal point right now for our Eastern Partnership policy. However, still Russia is absolutely the top priority. And that's why I may tell you that I have managed to invite several human rights activists from St. Petersburg coming here to Wroclaw. Oh, they were not allowed to speak because that was a very light initiative to invite them, but to invite them, to let them be and to let them listen and to have be part of our discussion about the East. If I may tell you the answer to the main question, what is the future of the East? I was thinking about that, preparing for that panel. And I may tell you, either the future of East is with West, or there is no future for East, including Russia. This is, I mean, that might be provocative, but I am not an expert, I'm a politician. I've been dealing with the Eastern Partnership countries as a member of the European Parliament for already 10 years and as a vice president for last 2.5. And I will tell you that there is no alternative. And Russia must be included. However, that's true. Not the Putin Russia, but the Russia which is represented by those people from St. Petersburg, for instance. And I can tell you, because I was listening to President Poroshenko introductory speech this morning, and that was an excellent speech. That was the great speech. And there was the message, how to talk with Russians. With no complex, with absolutely as equal, and as also the president of Estonia yesterday said, when we should have talked, we were silent. And now we should learn from Ukrainians, from Belarusians, from Georgians, how to talk to Russians being also effective, efficient.
This is really very interesting. Minister, can I pick up this point? I mean, do the Russians talk to you? Not you, President, but Georgia? Do you see each other on an equal footing, or is Georgia still trying to come to terms with trying to have a rapprochement with Moscow?
Thank you very much. Of course, clearly the policy of Georgia is to normalize relations with the Russian Federation, and we made a number of very important steps. So the Prime Minister appointed its special representatives who deals with his Russian counterparts on the less politically sensitive issues like economic, culture, people-to-people contacts. We have also a very important format of Geneva negotiations when we talk the deoccupation of the Georgian territories, which remains occupied by the Russian Federation. But to say frankly, if we are achieving any tangible results on an economic front, on a cultural front, on a people-to-people front, yes, we can see that there are some positive elements. But when it comes to the real stuff, the deoccupation, unfortunately not. We on a daily basis face the provocative action from the Russian Federation on the occupation line. They on a daily basis arrest Georgians, harassing them under the absolutely groundless pretext as if they violated the border crossing regulations. But where is the border? It's the territory of Georgia.
Does this hinder, I mean, you're set to sign the association accord in the summer. Will you do it despite these
Absolutely. Nothing can derail Georgia from signing the association agreement, which is scheduled for 27th of June, and nothing can derail Georgia from our NATO membership aspirations. This is the demand of the Georgian public, and the public support to Georgia's NATO and EU membership exceeds 85%. So they, as a humble servants of the Georgian public, government of Georgia implements this policy pretty robust way.
Konstantin, the view from Moscow, Georgia signing the accord, and Moldova's, we can discuss Moldova if anybody's here from Moldova, it would be great to hear you. Is Russia uneasy about Georgia signing the accord?
Thank you very much, Judy. I think the Russian government is, of course, uneasy about anyone signing an accord with the EU now, after Ukraine. It's very interesting for someone like us who've been watching Russia-NATO, for example, interactions since mid-90s, when you had all these people like the infamous Mr. Churkin saying, oh, you know, the EU accession for anyone is not a problem, it has no military dimension, NATO is the danger. Now it's all reversed. NATO is still a danger. I'll explain why if you want. But the EU, after Ukraine, has shown that it's a very powerful attraction, which lures, as Minister Sikorski said today, the countries out of this undemocratic orbit of corruption, power politics, gang state. And in this respect, official Moscow is worried about it. What can it do about it is a different matter. In Moldova, let's face it, the Transnistria could, well, basically go independent any time, and the Moldovans would not be able to do anything about it. And they, well, I've spoken to Moldovan officials, they say, well, you know, we're not going to go to war over that. Georgia is much more difficult, I think, for Moscow, because everything that could have been done to Georgia has already been done. And I think that even, say, incorporation of South Ossetia into Russia, at the demand of the people, of course, all the three of them, will not change anything, actually probably strengthen Georgia's position. So my feeling that in the short term, Russia will not move on Georgia, but may move on Moldova with one simple thing. There is a big hope that after the Communist Party becomes, well, there is a hope in Moscow, that's what I mean, becomes a dominant party in parliament, it will call for renegotiation, which means, in fact, abrogation or dustbinning of the association agreement. So I think that there is some hope pinned on domestic Moldovan forces with regard to Moldova, and I think there is very little that can be done with regard to Georgia.
I want to throw out this question to both the panel and the floor, and please put up your hands if you want to ask a question. I want to start a big debate here. Do you think I mean, all of us have an idea here, there's a consensus here that we know why Europe's East matters, including Russia. I mean, this is just not about stability, it is about values. It's about what Marie touched on, the society, the building of a society, of a civil society. Do you think the Europeans as a whole, the Western Europeans, the East Europeans understand this and collectively are prepared to go for the long haul? Jacek, you're nodding negatively. Please answer and please join in the debate here. Jacek.
I may tell you, okay, something has changed in the European Parliament at least after the Vilnius and the Maidan, let's say, revolution. But still, I think majority of, let's say, common Europeans think that Ukraine, Belarus, and Georgia, and Moldova, including as well, is a part of the Russian sphere of interest, and we shouldn't interfere there. However, as I remember, the very beginning of the Eastern Partnership Program, that was not designed to challenge Russia's interest there in the region. That was just to offer an alternative, an option to those nations, whether to go to associate with Russia or with the West. However, Putin made that a battlefield, and now we should win the battle. This is the only what I can say.
How do we win it?
I mean, once again, offering the economic assistance. I'm not telling about the military battle, of course, but economic assistance and the political perspective, very clear perspective of membership, not just an association. And that was also a demand or a request, more than demand, of Poroshenko's speech this morning. One of the very clear messages he sent from Verkhovna Rada.
Yes, I think Vladimir Putin overplayed his hand. I mean, clearly, that it was in his interest and the interest of his regime to keep a sort of status quo, that is, sort of sphere of influence, what I have called for years the sandwich states. Those states that are not really sovereign and do not belong. I mean, Putin's policy in the last 10 years or so has been very simple. None of those countries, post-Soviet countries, may belong to a multilateral organization of which Russia is not a member. And today, because he overplayed his hands, was very brutal, made many mistakes, and underestimated Ukrainian society and Ukrainian political capacity for leadership. He has broken this sort of a comfortable status quo that we in Western Europe should never have accepted, because it was creating insecurity for those peoples in the in-between states. It was creating insecurity for us. We saw it, for example, during the many gas wars between Russia and Ukraine, and also because it froze democratization in 6 countries that we in Europe pretended to be our close neighbors and which we wanted to engage in. So the result is very positive, I think. If we keep in mind, the mistake that maybe Putin could not have made, and the many mistakes that the Ukrainians might have made and that they didn't make.
This is loaded for me, Professor, but I'm just moderating. Konstantin, a quick point from you, and from Pavol, and we have a lady here wanting to ask a question.
I think, Marie, tu as raison, comme toujours. I think that not only Putin has committed a mistake externally, because I think that we are too much in the West, generally too much, into discussing the Ukrainian crisis in this kind of geopolitical term. Sometimes it's nearly airless, it's so academic sometimes. In fact, the driver behind what happened is very much domestic. And I think that Putin, by doing what he did with the Crimea, has changed completely the way the Russian regime's legitimacy generates itself. It used to be we pretended we have a president whom we elect every 6 years. Okay, well, we always had to elect one president, but we pretended we elected the president. Now, after the Crimea, what Putin did, he changed his image completely. He's now very close to, the Emperor of Russia, who produces miracles, like producing the Crimea or producing Transnistria tomorrow. It's like a magician in a circus who pulls rabbits out of the hat all the time. And that's his legitimacy. The moment you can't pull out the rabbit out of the hat, the circus public boos you. And I think that this is the road on which he suddenly started. And this is, I think, why quite a lot of people, at least in my immediate environment, which is ostensibly very small, we feel that what happened is that Putin kind of speeded up Russian history and created more instability and more unpredictability for himself and for his regime. And by the way, that doesn't give a lot of people very joyous feelings, because we don't know who will replace him.
Exactly.
But I think that in terms of this kind of muddling through to 2018 presidential election under the slogan of economic stability and more or less boring existence, that's out of the window now. And it will be very difficult to regain this position as the president of stability as opposed to the emperor of Russia.
Emperors of Russia don't have a record of longevity. Pavol.
Yeah. If one look at last 6 months, I think, and Maria alluded to that, that things change so rapidly and in so many directions where we were not ready to anticipate them. I don't remember any other case but Ukraine where analysts were so wrong. It was difficult to write analysis not from 1 week to another. Even in hours, many analyses were wrong, because Russia started to use completely different technique, mixture of hard power with soft power, and we, with our world of illusions, believing that soft power sells well and everybody will do things in order to be like us or with us, particularly Eastern Partnership countries or those with whom we meet. I think we fell into a lot of illusions and traps. And I think that today, I'm very happy that Ukraine inaugurated president, and I haven't read what Jacek is mentioning, that Poroshenko's speech was inspiring. I think that just a few weeks ago we were terrified whether there will be elections. There were elections, and I think that this is a window of opportunity to rethink how are we going to live and work in this new period. But as much as possible, I would urge all of us to delete a lot of illusions and wishful thinking and start very bold political thinking and very bold activities towards Ukraine, Russia, East, what we are discussing now.
I think I'm going to throw open the questions. Just one thing. What you're really saying is that Europe, excluding Poland, of course, and some of the East European countries, we have to get out of our comfort zone. I mean, we locked ourselves into a comfort zone and created this illusion of the status quo. Yeah. Thanks, Pavol, Konstantin, for this. Jacek, proszę bardzo. I've got 3 questions here. Please
there's one in the back.
Oh gosh, there's okay, stop. Jacek, thanks. Question here, back at that table, and I'll take this first batch of 3 questions. Please identify yourselves, and then we'll go over here. But don't worry, I promise.
Hello, my name is Cordelia. I'm a student at University of Warsaw, and I also write for Investor.ge with the American Chamber of Commerce in Georgia. My question, I'd really like to go back to what Judy originally asked about Europe. A lot of people have talked about how the events in Ukraine have given NATO new life. So my question, perhaps debatable, I know, but my question is that perhaps have the events in Ukraine given Western Europeans a new life in getting outside of the comfort zone? So that would go to the Western Europeans, and then to the Polish sites, you sort of are in the middle, and so how do you then facilitate that initiative? And then to the Georgian delegation, then do you see that, and can you harness that in preventing something like what happened in Ukraine and happening to Georgia? Can you continue that initiative so that Western Europe sees this in the new framework of Ukraine?
Okay, that's 3 questions. This is an exception. You're only allowed 1 question from now on. I think we should take those 3 questions quickly. I haven't forgotten, and then we take the next batch of 2 questions. Please, first question, comfort zone. Second question, NATO, the NATO new life, second question, comfort zone, third Poland, which is quite complicated. Let's take a few more. Okay, let me take this one. Please wait patiently.
Yes, my name's Bartosz Muszkowski. I'm representing European Center of Geopolitical Analysis. Well, we're talking about the East, but in my opinion, the East starts at the West. The whole policy. But going after the words of Minister Sikorski, that he's more afraid about Germans' inactivity than taking leadership by Germans. Mr. Konstantin, I will direct this question to you. How could you describe the current German policy? Because for me, it's too soft. And the second short question to Mr. Protasiewicz, if you...
There's so many people.
Okay. So I'll stop here.
No, thanks. Back at the standing up. Hi. Microphone, or you can shout. Thank you.
Hi, Jesper Petersen. I'm a consultant in Copenhagen, Denmark. Over the last week, we've seen some interesting developments in Abkhazia, where the so-called leader was actually chased out of town, in part due to popular dissatisfaction about, promises that hadn't been kept, or economic prosperity that simply hadn't been delivered on. We've also seen turmoil in Armenia over recent months. I'm curious as to whether some of the promises that Russia seems to be making, can the panel address whether these promises can be delivered on, or whether there's sort of a dismay that we may start to see in places like Crimea, South Ossetia, Armenia, Belarus, and so forth?
Thank you very much. And the last question over on that side, Robert, question and identify yourself, please.
Thank you, Judy. It's actually a quick comment. I really think that we should spend more time discussing what is it that we can do in our part of the world as well.
Okay, can you identify yourself?
Robert Pschel, I'm the director of the NATO Information Office in Moscow. Yes. Okay. Because I've heard, I fully agree with what Minister Sikorski said, that we have lived through the age of illusion, but I'm afraid, I'm still hearing a lot of this. It doesn't matter, mistakes Putin's made. Let's think about our mistakes. We have to defend. We have to defend our websites, for example, which are under attack from trolls. We have to rebut the propaganda which is there. And only when we set our house in order and show a greater degree of unity, then we can start evangelizing to the other countries. It's a short comment, but I think it's...
Good comment. Thank you, Robert. Can we work backwards? Abkhazia, Germany, the comfort zone. Abkhazia, Minister.
Thank you for the question. Developments in Georgia in 2008, invasion and occupation, developments in Ukraine, and what's going on in Abkhazia right now cannot be discussed as an isolated events. These are a very worrisome pattern and the parts of the big picture, which is driven by the Cold War thinking of the Kremlin, of course, which has the purpose to rebuild so-called the Soviet Union, and Russians are pretty blunt while outlining their goals. The main thing is the main question, what we need to face here, the like-minded countries, is that how we can challenge the military adventurism of the Russian Federation, which challenges the strategic goal of Europe whole, free, and at peace.
Let me pick up the question, though, because he's really asking if Putin can't deliver for Abkhazia. Is this a potential for a change, or would this reflect disappointment or betrayal that Russia hasn't delivered the goods for Abkhazia, which it has promised?
No. Well, Russia lately was very clear that despite the fact that they indicated that they're okay with the association agreement between Georgia and the European Union, they still indicated that the signing of the agreement will bear some consequences. So we can connect all these dots and think that these events may be well orchestrated by the Russian Federation to demonstrate that this is the leverage they can cultivate. But what are other leverages Russia has on Georgia? We don't have economic. They don't have an economic leverage on us. They don't have an energy leverage. Public attitude, as I mentioned, is more than 85% in support of NATO and EU membership. So the only thing the Russian Federation can do can create some instabilities in the occupied territories where we, government of Georgia, cannot exercise the control at this stage.
Well, we'll touch on the Cardiff Summit in a few minutes. We'll deal with this. Konstantin, Germany.
Well, let me be blunt. Germany was the Kremlin's, and still is, the Kremlin's best ally. And there is no doubt in my mind that it's not for nothing that the last two German ambassadors, not the current one, the previous two German ambassadors to Russia were jokingly called in the Moscow diplomatic circuit ambassadors of the Russian Federation to the Russian Federation. So I think what we see is that on every single issue that could impact, and for me what's important is the future of Russian democracy. For every single issue where Germany could leave a certain imprint, it doesn't. In the end, I think German government is completely incapacitated by the influence of the East Chamber lobby, all the Eons and Siemenses and Ruhrgases of this world, who always find a way of talking themselves into coalition politics. So, as we know, for example, in the run-up to the Cardiff summit, the main obstacle to a map for Georgia is German position. So what I can say is that we have a lot of, actually in what we've seen in the last few years, is this kind of real comeback of this Ostpolitik, Willy Brandt type, delusions, especially on the social democratic side of the German spectre, because they try to draw on a tradition that is already gone. I mean, it's irrelevant. It's like learning. I mean, learning from Bismarck is probably better than learning from Willy Brandt, frankly speaking, who was in the end wrong about the German future. So I think that it's to sum it up. I think that the German position is crucial, and I think it for now helps the Kremlin.
We could continue this. Marie, a quick point, and Jacek wanted to say something. I actually don't agree with you, Konstantin, on many points. Yes. I think German policy has changed. Marie, say what you want.
This is what I, in fact, this is what I wanted to argue by cautiously taking the case of my own country, France. I mean, the French ambassadors to Moscow in the last 15 years have been just there to do what my government nicely calls economic diplomacy. So I think it's the same for many countries, So you don't judge the German or French policies just by the attitude of the ambassador. No, but it's, but this is how you started your argument. And second, much more important point, this is changing. This is what you've just described is certainly changing in France, very much so. That is, there is now a challenge to a very strong pro-Russian lobby in France. I gather it probably is also the case in Germany, but probably in a different way. So I'll be happy if we can discuss that further, because this where we all, I mean, scholars, experts, journalists, politicians, where we can have a real influence.
Completely agree. Jacek, I want you to come in, and we have somebody...
Yeah. Also, very brief point. Let me also disagree with you, because that is why we may be grateful to Putin, what has leaked from the Angela Merkel's conversation about after having a conversation with Putin. I mean, I think that at least she, but means that the German elite realized that the business as usual is not longer to be done, and we can observe that in the European Parliament as well. Our member colleagues,
but our German Georgia, Jacek, exactly the same phrases.
No. Our German colleagues realized that the policy as it used to be conducted there in the European Parliament, preventing from offering the membership perspective, should be changed, and the Germans are at the front of the change from the Westerns.
Yes.
Yes, I'm Tomas Dabkus from Lithuania, and I have a question to the French researcher. A very quick question. You mentioned we cannot judge the position by how the ambassadors act. Can we judge the French position by selling Mistral assault ships to Russia and Germany supporting it?
Briefly.
It's economic diplomacy.
It's economic.
Okay.
It's economic. You know, I'm so comfortable because I do not represent my own government and I'm an independent scholar. But I did battle in 2010 so that this contract wouldn't be signed. And maybe you remember that part of the contract was signed with Igor Sechin, which I think tells
Yes.
a lot.
And now
I think 2010 was a mistake, but I think many of us made the mistake of taking seriously the Medvedev presidency.
Exactly.
And that was part of it.
Yeah.
I was one of the very few scholars who very consistently said and wrote that Medvedev was the number 2 and not the number 1, and that we should be very wary of this. So now, of course, the French government is stuck with this contract that was signed in 2010. Now, thinking of what was very interestingly discussed yesterday about sanctions, we had a very interesting panel about sanctions, and one of the panelists mentioned the credible sanctions or credible deterrence. I'm just hoping, to be positive, that the postponed delivery of the first Mistral warship is playing as good, credible deterrent and pressure. And I hope that this is one of the many factors and pressures that have forced Vladimir Putin yesterday in France to shake hands with Petro Poroshenko, but even more important, to accept that the two countries should go for a ceasefire, which is recognition that Russia was into some kind of direct conflict and warfare in Ukraine.
This is a very important comment. Just over here, we've got two questions over one thing in defence of Germany, and the Poles are here. During Angela Merkel's presidency of the G8, it was G8 then, and the EU presidency, and just when Kaczynski's, before Tusk was in power, Merkel stood up for the Poles over the whole meat embargo, and she was not going to allow Putin to divide and rule the EU. And Putin, the Russians were convinced, those Poles, the West Europeans, we can divide and rule. And Merkel knew exactly what was happening, and she said, no way. Anyway, German policy has gone some way, not a long way, but it's gone some way. Two questions over here. 3. 1, 2, 3. Identify yourselves. One question.
Short comment, Irina Darchiashvili, University of Wroclaw, regarding the terminology. Today in the morning, in the presidential speech, Poroshenko said that Crimea was, is, and will be Ukrainian. At the same time, yesterday, in the end of the day, we still call it Russian-Ukrainian conflict, so Russian-Ukrainian crisis. So maybe this crisis, while the number of people shooting every day is increasing, and number of internally displaced persons, IDPs, is increasing hour by hour, is not just a crisis. At least in Georgia, we called it a war. So the comment is about the terminology. I think it's time to change a bit this. Okay. It will be at least clear.
It's very important.
Thank you.
Language is really important, especially when we even define the East. Please, one question and your name.
First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Jacek Protasiewicz, which invited our delegation from Russia to this event. Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I have one question for our panelists. So what do you think about the Eurasia Union? You know, 1 week ago it was Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan who signed an agreement. And we as human rights defenders, we are very afraid of harmonization of legislation. Yeah. And we are afraid of that Russia will choose the Belarus scenario. I want to know your opinion. And also I have some words for our expert from Georgia. Me as one of the founder of Georgia-Russian NGO Forum, I want to say some words to support Georgia.
You can do that later.
In these difficult times.
Please introduce yourself, because you didn't, in fact.
I'm Maria Konevskaya. I represent Human Rights Research Center from St. Petersburg.
From CP, welcome. There was one more question here, please. Thank you. Great to have you here.
Hello, Leo Mausbach from European University Viadrina in Frankfurt-Oder. I would like to just shortly ask, you said we have Belarusian guests. What does the new situation mean for Belarus?
the new situation at Poroshenko.
Yes,
UK.
and the whole development.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Belarus, excellent.
Yeah.
And we can ask our Belarusian panel too. Okay, the terminology is very important. I agree. Let's stop messing around. Incursion. You know, it was. You know, it's. Give me what word you like? A war? Is war too strong? What word would you like? What word would you like? Hello, what you? The lady who brought up the terminology.
Because we still call it.
I know. What word would you like?
For my case, I consider this is a war because many
Okay.
people are dying
Yes.
hour still and are shoot it. And whatever was the jure and de facto, these games, what we call like the area which was Ukrainian or is Ukrainian, for whom is de facto and de jure Ukrainian. Thank you.
And now we take up the Russian question. The Euro-Asian, it's very important. Euro-Asian, what do we think of it? Oh wow, it's a great question. Who wants to answer the Euro-Asian?
Okay.
No, we do the Euro-Asian and then we do the Belarus. Well, he can answer this too.
Yeah.
There's one more question. We do that later.
Thank you very much. My name is Tigran Ohanin. I'm representing Armenia Lankirkon Scholarship Program here. One question to our panelists, please. The president of France, François Hollande, announced, for example, for case of Armenia, that it is possible to allow Armenia to have good cooperation both for European Union and also, unfortunately, for Russia also. What do you think? So, in Eastern Partnership countries, is it possible to have very good cooperation with the European Union and also to keep cooperation with the Russian Federation? Or it is not possible?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
This is high diplomatic stakes. Let's, Jacek, can we get the Belarusians to deal with the Euro-Asian? So, you got your Euro-Asian community. What do you think of it?
Możesz po polsku.
Everybody understands Polish?
Those who don't understand Polish, please use your phones, because Milinkiewicz will be speaking in Polish.
Jacku, nie ma...
There is no interpretation. Well, okay.
Maybe somebody can...
Może zrezygnujemy z Białorusi na razie.
Thank you, super. We have somebody here. We have a very kind person who's offered to translate. Thank you.
Okay, very good.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani. Yes. Yeah. Misha, Prussia, you've got to. First of all, you must introduce yourself because a lot of people who don't know you.
So I will introduce Alexander Milinkiewicz was a presidential candidate of the United Opposition of Belarus in 2006. He got over 20% in that race, and now he is still a leader of the democratic opposition in Belarus, one of the main leaders of the opposition.
And laureate of Sakharov Prize by European Parliament.
Yeah. Okay. So we try to keep this quite concise because we've 15 minutes. I mean, this is really very interesting.
Po pierwsze trzeba powiedzieć, że Białoruś z tej szóstki krajów wschodniego partnerstwa jest najbardziej uzależnionym od Rosji.
For the first, I would like to mention that Belarus, among the 6 countries of the Eastern Partnership, the most dependent on Russia.
I Łukaszenko na pewno lubi więcej niż wszystko na świecie swoją władzę.
And Lukashenko loves the most in all the globe just power.
I on próbuje zagrać. Z jednej strony on uprzedził u Putina, że jak przyjdziesz z wojskiem, nawet mówił o tym.
And he tries to play a double game. Like from one side he plays with Putin in case he would use the military forces.
To jeszcze nie wiadomo na czyjej stronie będzie to wojsko twoje. Bo jest popularny bardzo w Rosji.
And even does know on which side the military forces will play.
Z jednej strony twardo mówił kilka razy, że jest absolutnie przeciw federalizacji Ukrainy, bo to jest destabilizacja regionu. Chyba słusznie mówił.
From one side, he already mentioned several times that he is absolutely against the federalization of Ukraine because it's the deconstruction of this state.
Kiedy w Moskwie nazywano Turczynowa przedstawicielem hunty, to on nazywał panie prezydencie Turczynowa.
When in Moscow the Turchina was called as of Hurta, I don't know how to say Junta, yes. From another, he was calling him as the president.
Rozumiemy, że Łukaszenko nigdy nie będzie gwarantem niepodległości.
But we understand that Lukashenko never will become the guarantee of independence.
Ale w pewnych momentach, walcząc o swoją władzę, no, będzie się sprzeciwiał powiększeniu wpływu Putina.
And at the same time, he was trying to gain his power and in some moments to go against the Putin's influence.
Ja chcę jeszcze powiedzieć dwa słowa, co wśród ludzi się dzieje. To nie Łukaszenko jest najważniejsze, a najważniej co w społeczeństwie.
And I would like to mention the most important what is going on around among the people, and it's not the Lukashenko, it's what's going on in society.
Ostatnie lata ciągle był taki dynamiczny wzrost nastrojów proeuropejskich.
And during last years there is a increasing growth to the pro-European direction.
I za Europę było już ponad 50%, mimo izolacji informacyjnej.
And despite of the informational isolation, there are more than 50% supporting.
There were. Can we sorry to interrupt. We have
in Belarus.
It's very important that we deal with this question. You know, does this Euro-Asian Union actually make it far more difficult now for Belarus, the opposition particularly, to deal with the EU? In other words, how should the EU now deal with Belarus? Please.
Ja jestem zawsze na stronie tego, żeby nie izolować Białorusi, izolując Łukaszenkę.
I'm keeping the line, if Europe decides to isolate Lukashenko, do not isolate Belarus.
Najważniejsze hasło, moim zdaniem, więcej Europy w Białorusi.
And main motto would be, the slogan would be more Europe in Belarus.
Jest problem wiz, bo Białorusini płacą ciągle najwięcej w świecie za wizę szengenowską. Jest problem kontaktów. To jest, czym szerzej kontakty, tym więcej Europy w głowach. O to chodzi. Łukaszenko odchodzi, a ktoś musi go zastąpić. I to będzie decyzja ludzi.
Belarus represents the country which gets the highest, the biggest amount of visas to the European Union, and from the other side, if like as more Europe we have, European contacts in Europe we have in Belarus, more options we have in future to have someone who will be in the government instead of Lukashenko.
Ostatnie, krótko. Moim zdaniem nie izolacja, a krytyczny, uwarunkowany dialog.
And last, not the isolation, but critical and conditional dialogue.
Thank you. This is really important that the EU must learn this civil society. Stop dealing with the official NGOs because they're sanctioned by, in any case, the government. Very important. Thank you very, very much. Konstantin had a quick point.
Two brief points. Yeah. I think that well, Mr. Lukashenko can go on giving interviews to Dosh television in Moscow and call Mr. Turchinov president. Well, it's exactly like Nicolae Ceausescu, who didn't rupture relations with Israel and condemn the invasion of Czechoslovakia. It's, you know, this kind of PR game, which in fact masks one thing. Belarus is totally economically dependent on Putin's Russia. And what Lukashenko thinks or doesn't think about the Eurasian Union is completely irrelevant in Moscow. Yeah. And in this respect, Nazarbayev is much more relevant. And so, Lukashenko can go on playing Ceausescu games. We know how it ended in 1989 in Romania. As for France, just to come back for one small thing, Marie, your president said that that France will fulfill its obligations in Mistral in October if there are no pan-European sanctions. We know there are not going to be any pan-European sanctions. And then Hollande said, otherwise we'll have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars of damages to Russia. Let me tell you something. The moment there is a European leader, I don't know whether it's in France or in Luxembourg or somewhere else, who says, we are prepared to pay $100 million of damages in order to prove our point, that is the leader with whom Putin will negotiate and whom he will respect, and I think that Poroshenko has the biggest chance to be that leader now.
Jacek, a quick word, and we have just 1 second. Jacek, a quick intervention.
I have just two remarks. The first one is Following Alexander and Konstantin remarks on Belarus, the answer to the Euro-Asian Union is this is a copy of the Soviet Union and will not remain longer than Putin's political life. And the second question is, what you have, Konstantin, you have asked why it happened. I mean, what is the difference between Ukraine and Georgia after the invasion to Georgia and taking over Crimea? What is the difference? The difference is with respect to Georgia. Ukraine is closer, bigger, and more visible. Also, after the Maidan revolution, which was absolutely, we are living in the PR, with the TV, the pictures world. So if the audience sees people protesting on streets, it makes a difference, and that would not. It didn't happen in Georgia at the time.
Thanks, Jacek. We have a question over here. Please identify yourself. One question.
My name is Ivan Ljubovitsky. I'm the founder of Promova think tank. We're dealing with social values and research in the former Soviet Union. And this is the very point that I want to make, is values do matter. Because what happens is we're usually sticking to the institutional side, and the institutional side is something that gives you pain relief, but if you want to really deal with the issues, you have to go into the values, and that means long-term programs, that means long-term approach, because the window of opportunities is always short. But if you want to fulfill that window of opportunities, you really have to be prepared. And this is the point that Minister Sheremeta, Minister of Economy of Ukraine, made yesterday here at this forum. He said that the thing that he wants to ask the West is to stick to the Western values. Because if the values are conditional, then they're not values, they're interests.
It's a very good point you make, because if we renege on our values, we lose that perspective for our neighbours. That's why they don't join the EU for the money. They join the EU for the universal values, but they're not EU values; they're universal. Thank you, Maria.
Yes.
Quick point.
Yes. May I react to this question of values? You have seen the results of the European Parliament elections in a number of countries, including my country, France. And I'm very sorry to report that about a third of the population of France understands values not in the way we here understand them, and that there is an echo of the Russian regime's call for traditional values. I am sorry to report this, but I think it is important that we today do not behave as romantic, pro-democratic supporters. No, it is really, Judy, I think
sign here.
If I may, yes, but I think it is a most important point, because we do live in real countries with real societies, with real weak governments, in some cases. And I wish we had that in mind when we discuss what François Hollande or Angela Merkel or Cameron should do or not do. Thank you.
But Marie, this feeds into how Putin does manipulate, or behind the shadow of some of these fringe parties.
Yes, he does manipulate. He invites Marine Le Pen. But if it works, it is our responsibility as societies, and he manipulates what can be manipulated. Now, one more point is I think the Eurasia Union simply does not exist, and we should now feel comfortable in Europe saying no, we are not keeping Ukrainians from a wonderful Eurasian Union.
I'm under pressure to get the big Ukrainian panel. Quick word from Pavol. Quick word from Jacek and the Minister. Pavol, quick.
I'm very grateful for Yevhen's intervention. I think that we need to be very careful now after these Euro elections what kind of composition of parliament will be. And I think it will be very indicative who will be new Cathy Ashton. Absolutely. I think if it would be Radek Sikorski, I think value-based foreign policy is something realistic. If we will figure out some very neutral person, I think that I could imagine further erosion and split within European Union when it comes to value-based foreign policy.
Absolutely. Jacek, quick point.
I'm afraid he will not be. But okay.
Yeah, me too.
But what I'd like to say, it is very sad. The results are very sad. However, let me be an optimistic. 1/3 is a lot, but still minority. And do as much as possible to keep it be minority.
Here. Yes. Minister.
So 3 very brief points. Sanctions can come and go, but West needs more robust long-term strategy how to move forward with the Europe whole and free.
Absolutely.
Second, Georgia is very much encouraged with the statement of President Obama, Europe's Reassurance Initiative, and look forward to implementation of this very important initiative. And the third one, what Georgia needs the means of political and military deterrence. We need membership action plan at the Wales summit, and we need the military elements to deter possible aggressions from the countries with challenge.
Best of luck in Cardiff, Minister. Great panel, great audience. Sorry we ran out of time. We could talk about this for another hour, actually, especially values. We will return here next year, hopefully. Thank you very much, all of you.
If I may ask the organizers, more Russian participants, please.